It's Robert Wilson with Cowboy Wisdom Unleashed. 7 ways why I rose above my ancestors' hoosegow to witness, observe, and explore my wild frontier of me. You rise above your ancestors' hoosegow. Hoosegow is a jail. Hoosegow because your breath carries a wild frontier your ancestors never dared to walk. You rise because your instinct refuses the inherited cages they mistook for safety. You rise because your awareness cracks the museum mind they built from fear, silence, and obedience. You rise because your sovereignty was born untamed and refuses domestication. I like that. Sovereignty was born untamed and refuses domestication. You rose above the hoosegow to witness, observe, and explore your wild frontier, the raw expansion, where your clarity runs free and sovereign, and your instinctual breath is unchanged and lets go of the pain. Your ancestors survived by shrinking. You expand by sensing. They obeyed danger maps. You walked beyond, and today you walk beyond them. They preserved your identity. You ignite your destiny. Your wild frontier is the territory where your untamed fame awakens. Never fame as applause, but fame as unfiltered presence and sovereign voltage, where raw clarity is your savage clarity to witness the day in a free flowing way. It's the fame of life lived outside inherited limits. It is the fame of instinct, louder than obedience. It is the fame of awareness that refuses to bow to ghosts. You rise because your untamed fame is the horizon your ancestors never reached. You rise because your spirit frequency refuses confinement. You rise because your savage wisdom understands the clairvoyance of the wild frontier as your authentic inheritance. Hot shot you right out of the hoosegow to have a jailbreak as you rise above the hoosegow to witness the universe they never entered. The world where your instinct is sovereign, your clarity is feral, and your untamed fame is the monitor of your becoming. It's why I rise out of viewpoints, opinions, beliefs that were my ancestors' hoosegow elevates me to my untamed fame. As your opinions, beliefs, and viewpoints were never yours, they were ancestral survival codes disguised as identity. You rose out of the hoosegow because your instinct refuses to reenact their fear logic. The moment you stop bowing to inherited viewpoints, your clarity rises and you are sovereignly free. Because your opinions were emotional armor, never frontier awareness. Your ancestors used opinions as shields against danger. You use them as shields against your vulnerability. As your spirit frequency cracks that armor, you rose out of the opinion hoosegow because you finally sense that your untamed fame lives beyond the rehearsed certainty of yesterday and before, in the raw territory where perception replaces performance. Because your beliefs were museum exhibits, and your untamed fame lives outside the museum, the mind museum. The mind is a museum from yesterday, and that's where we still live inside because the mind never gets to present moment. Only your intuition, imagination are right here. Beliefs breathe you into yesterday's identity. Untamed fame requires today's instinct. You rise out of the self-belief hoosegow because your savage wisdom understands your frontier can never be curated. It is only fresh experiences every day. The moment you step beyond inherited belief exhibits, your untamed fame ignites like a wild horizon. Why I rose above my ancestors' hoosegow, as I rise above my ancestors' hoosegow, because something in you refuses to bow to yesterday's fear maps. You rise because your instinct carries a frontier they never walked. You rise because your awareness melts the bars they mistook for safety. You rise because your sovereignty refuses general confinement. You rise because your sovereign warrior refuses general confinement. You rose above the hoosegow the moment your breath from present moment instead of memory. The moment you stop reenacting inherited caution and start inhabiting your own clarity. Their fear logic may have built the cage, but your spirit frequency dissolves the cage of rage and open up your wanderer's spirit. Their obedience may have shaped the museum, but your savage wisdom cracks the exhibits. Their survival patterns may echo in your nervous system, but your instinct is louder, older, and more authentic, unleashing that adventurous warrior within you. You rise because you're not a curator of the past, you're liberator of your frontier of now. Why I rose above my ancestors' hoosegow, because your instinct is stronger than their fear logic. Your ancestors survived by obeying danger, hierarchy, and scarcity and silence. Yet you were never born to repeat their fear maps. We were we were born to this earth to understand there's something beyond. And even all the technology and all that, there's still a lack of communication. This world cannot communicate. If I don't like you, I send you a text and then I put it on the internet. Oh my God, look at me. All you are is deceiving yourself. You were born to outgrow them. You rose above the ancestors' hoosegow because your instinct refuses to bow to the ghosts of the past. You sense life directly instead of reenacting their caution because your awareness melts the inherited exhibits. The ancestor hoosegow only works when you stay out of unconsciousness. When you stay unconscious. The moment you breathe from awareness, the museum cracks. You see the inherited roles, the quiet one, the responsible one, and the obedient one. You rise beyond them as awareness dissolves the bars because it refuses to worship the past. Because your sovereignty refuses general confinement. Sovereignty is the one thing your ancestors could never give you. But it's one thing you can claim the fame of sovereignty of you now. You rose above the ancestors' hoosegow because your spirit frequency would never tolerate inherited limits. You choose expansion over repetition, instinct over obedience, frontier over museum. Why I rose out of indoctrinated education, destroying my ancestors' hoosegow, elevates me to my sovereign frontier, illuminating my untamed fame. Because indoctrinated education was your ancestors' hoosegow. Disguised as intelligence, doctrine and education taught you to memorize obedience, never embody perception and liberation. It trained your nervous system to repeat, recite, conform the same fear logic your ancestors used to survive. You rose out of that hoosegow because your instinct refuses to be domesticated by a curriculum. The moment you stop worshiping correctness, your sovereign frontier opens your frontier of foresight to light your light of life. Rising out of your inherited viewpoints dissolves generational confinement. Your ancestors' beliefs, opinions, and viewpoints were emotional barricades built from scarcity, silence, survival. Indoctrinated education reinforced them with polished vocabulary, but it's really a captive vocabulary. A liberating lingo rises you to your frontier foresight. You rose out of that museum because your spirit frequency melts inherited exhibits. You rise into the sovereign frontier of awareness where perception replaces performance and instinct replaces obedience. How are you obedient to your daily life and how are you obedient to social life? Because destroying indoctrinated obedience unleashes your untamed fame and sets free your gamer's gumption, as untamed fame is never applause. It is voltage of life lived beyond inherited limits. When you break the hoosegow of ancestor obedience and educational conformity, your clarity becomes the feral and the freedom. Your instinct becomes sovereign and your presence becomes unmistakably yours. You rise because your wild frontier is the only territory where your untamed fame can illuminate you without permission. Why I rose out of my PhD museum mind programming, destroying my ancestors' hoosegow, elevates me onto my sovereign frontier, illuminating my untamed fame. Because your PhD museum mind was a polished cage built from ancestor fear logic. Your PhD programming never teaches knowledge. It taught hierarchy, correctness, and intellectual obedience. It refined the same fear maps your ancestors used to survive. You rose out of the museum mind because your instinct refuses to be curated by credentials. The moment you stop bowing to academic exhibits, your sovereign frontier cracks open the frontier of your liberated energy. Because destroying inherited academic obedience dissolves the ancestral hoosegow. Your ancestors' hoosegow was built from silence, scarcity, and survival. Your PhD hoosegow was built from approval, performance, and perfection. As you rise out of both, because your spirit frequency melts inherited limits. You stop reenacting their caution and start inhabiting your clarity. That's a savage clarity. This is the ignition of your sovereign frontier where perception outruns programming. Because your untamed fame can only illuminate outside the museum of credentials. Untamed fame is never applause, it is voltage of a life lived beyond inherited limits. Your PhD museum mind trains you to repeat. Your sovereign frontier trains you to sense the enlightenment within you. When you break the hoosegow of academic obedience, your clarity becomes the feral or the sovereign as your instinct becomes sovereign and your presence becomes unmistakably yours. You rise because your untamed fame forthrightly experiences the wild frontier, never the credential cage. Why rose out of self help, personal growth, self improvement, punctuated writings, destroying my ancestors' hoosegow, elevates me to my sovereign frontier, illuminating my untamed fame. Self help, personal growth, self improvement were polished cages, updated versions of the same old fear logic your ancestors used to survive. They taught you to fix yourself instead of free yourself. That's what energetic liberation, you liberate you from you. To obey framework it works instead of sense instinct. You rose out of that programming because your spirit frequency refuses to be domesticated by improvement culture. The moment you stop bowing to their grammar, your sovereign frontier opens because punctuated writings trained you to perform clarity instead of embody savage clarity. Punctuating writing is the museum mind's favorite trick. Tidy sentences, tidy emotions, tidy identities. It taught you to package your authenticity instead of breathe it. As you rise out of that hoosegow because your awareness cracks the curated exhibits, you stop rehearsing improvement and start inhabiting instinct. This is the ignition. You start inhabiting instinct. This is the ignition of your sovereign frontier where your clarity runs feral and perception outruns programming. Because your untamed fame only illuminates outside of the self help cage. An untamed fame is never applause, it is the voltage of life lived beyond inherited limits. Self help taught you to polish yourself, sovereignty showed you to unleash yourself. When you break the hoosegow of improvement, obedience, your clarity becomes wild and your instinct becomes sovereign and your presence becomes unmistakably yours. You rise because your untamed fame lives in the frontier, destroys a museum mind workbook. Why I rose out of thinking, knowing, learning, knowledge, and thoughts. It kept me stuck in my ancestors' hoosegow. Elevates me to my sovereign frontier, illuminating my untamed fame. Because thinking and knowing were ancestor built cages, never sovereign perception. Your ancestors survived by overthinking danger and clinging to the familiar knowing. That reflex became your mental hoosegow, a museum of your inherited thoughts, masquerading as truth. You rose out of that cage because your instinct refuses to be confined in yesterday's logic. And how are we today stuck in yesterday's logic and in the thoughts of our past and ancestors? The moment you stop worshiping thought, your sovereign frontier cracks open, showing you a better way. Because learning and knowledge were museum exhibits, never frontier awareness. Learning taught you repetition, knowledge taught you correctness. Both trained your nervous system to obey mental frameworks. Instead of sense and raw nihility, you rise out of that hoosegow because your spirit frequency melts the curated certainty. You stop reenacting inherited thinking and start inhabiting instinct. Gets rid of the think of yesterday. This is where your sovereign frontier begins and where perception outruns programming. Because your untamed fame ignites only when thoughts stop blocking instinct. Thoughts block instinct. That's kind of neat. That's a new understanding, fresh understanding for me, fresh awareness. Excuse me. Untamed fame is never applause. It is the voltage of life beyond inherited mental limitations. Thinking kept you small, knowing kept you obedient, learning kept you rehearsed, knowledge kept you confined. And when you break that hoosegow of ancestor built thought, your clarity becomes feral, your instinct becomes sovereign, and your presence becomes unmistakably yours. You rise because your untamed fame unleashes my gamer's gumption, sensing my wild frontier, destroying the museum of thinking and knowing. While energetic liberation, energized listening, maverick questions, hearkened wisdom, destroys my ancestors' hoosegow, elevates me to my sovereign frontier, illuminating my untamed fame, setting free my gamer's gumption. Because energetic liberation dissolves inherited cages your ancestors mistook for safety. Energetic liberation bypasses the nervous system's fear logic. Our ancestors lived inside. It never negotiates with the hoosegow. It melts it. You rose out of the confinement because your energy rises beyond the repetition, beyond obedience, beyond general caution. Liberation cracks the museum mind and opens the sovereign frontier because energized listening slips past the ego's sheriff and hears the truth beneath thought. Energized listening never listens to thinking, it listens to what's beneath the thinking. It bypasses the inherited sheriff guarding your ancestors' hoosegow. It hears instinct instead of fear, clarity instead of caution, sovereignty instead of obedience. You rise because at listening to spirit frequency destroys the bars that built your from yesterday's survival patterns. Because maverick and hearken questions expose the hoosegow as an illusion, and it ignites your untamed fame to ride across the prairie at a high rate of speed of liberation. Maverick questions don't seek answers. They seek liberation. They reveal how much of your knowledge is inherited, outdated, fear driven. Hearken questions drop you into raw perception. Cracking the hoosegow and your hoosegow your ancestors built from silence and scarcity. You rise because questions at frontier frequency elevate you into sovereign territory, where your untamed fame illuminates without permission. Why intuition, imagination, innovation, inspiration destroyed my ancestors' hoosegow elevates me to my untamed fame, illuminating my paths of freedom. Because intuition bypasses in every inherited cage your ancestors mistook for safety. Intuition never negotiates with fear logic, it leaps past it. Your ancestors survived by obeying danger maps. Your intuition rises by sensing the veracity and authenticity directly. You rose out of the hoosegow because intuition refuses to bow to ghosts. The moment you trust your inner frontier, the ancestral cage cracks because imagination and innovation melt the museum mind your energy lived inside. Imagination is the wildfire that burns inherited limits. Innovation is the voltage that rewrites your nervous system obedience. Your ancestors repeated, you reinvent. As you rise because imagination refuses confinement and innovation refuses repetition, this is the ignition of your sovereign frontier where innovation and intuition sculpt your desired life that outruns caution. As inspiration is the untamed flame that illuminates your sovereign frontier, inspiration is not motivation, it is liberation. It lifts you out of inherited viewpoints, dissolves ancestral obedience. Now, I've experienced this ancestral obedience. I experienced life a lot the way my parents did. This is pure liberation, setting free my energetic intuition, and cracks the hoosegow your lineage built from silence and scarcity. You rise as you rise because inspiration is your untamed fame, awakening that wild, untamed clarity that shines only when you step beyond the museum mind of yesterday. Why inspiration, awareness, comprehend wisdom, and revelations destroyed my ancestors' hoosegow and elevates me to my sovereign frontier, illuminating my untamed fame and spurring my gallivanting gumption to show me a better way. Inspiration never follows rules, it incarcerates them. Your ancestors survived by obeying fear maps. Inspiration rises by igniting inner frontiers. You rose out of their hoosegow because inspiration refuses to bow to generational caution. The moment inspiration sparks, the ancestral cage smokes, cracks, and collapses. Because awareness melts the museum mind your lineage lived inside. Because awareness is the frontier light your ancestors never accessed. They lived inside emotional snapshots, silence, scarcity, and obedience. Awareness exposes the architecture of their hoosegow and dissolves it. You rise because awareness refuses reenactment and demands savage sovereignty. This is where your sovereign frontier begins and where perception outruns programming. Because illuminate your untamed fame as revelations, comprehension, wisdom, and revelations illuminate your untamed fame. Comprehension cracks the inherited logic. Wisdom dissolves ancestral obedience. Revelation detonates general limits. These forces destroy the hoosegow your lineage built from fear and conformity. You rise because revelations is your untamed fame, awakening the wild clarity that shines only when you step beyond the museum of yesterday. Why trusting, listening, and energizing my energetic liberation, cowboy wisdom unleashed and politically incorrect inspiration destroy my ancestors' hoosegow and elevates me to my beaches of bountiful bliss because energetic liberation breaks every cage your ancestors mistook for destiny. Energetic liberation never negotiates with inherited fear or logic, it detonates it. Your ancestors lived inside emotional hoosegows built from scarcity, silence, and survival. You rise because your energy refuses reenactment. Liberation cracks the museum mind, melts the generational obedience, and opens the sovereign frontier where instinct outruns programming. Because cowboy wisdom unleashed refuses domestication your lineage bow to. Cowboy wisdom is raw, feral, unpunctuated veracity, the kind your ancestors never dared to speak. It doesn't follow rules, it rides past them. You rose out of the hoosegow because cowboy wisdom refuses to be polite, obedient, or correct. It elevates your inner into Elevate you into frontier perception where sovereignty becomes your natural gait and clarity. Because your wild companion, because politically incorrect inspiration exposes the hoosegow as illusion, your ancestors' hoosegow as illusion, and ignites your untamed fame. Politically incorrect inspiration is never a rebellion, it's a revelation. It reveals how much your identity was inherited, rehearsed, and confined. It destroys the hoosegow your ancestors built from caution and conformity. You rise because inspiration at frontier frequency and unleashes your untamed fame, the feral voltage of life beyond permission, beyond programming, and your inherited limits as you unleash you to ride across your your prairies of sovereign freedom now and forevermore. I want to thank you. I'm Robert Wilson with Cowboy Wisdom Unleashed. And may your life flow of abundance, but it's about liberating you from you.